What makes a photograph street photography? It's a question that frequently happens among people who are fans of street photography, but sometimes those opinions that come from those conversations, they turn into these unwritten rules, and then those rules become these preconceived ideas about what's wrong and what is right. Personally, I don't believe there should be any rules when it comes to photography. I mean, we're talking about a genre that has so many different styles, so many different approaches to street photography. And the definition of street photography is pretty loose to begin with. Street photography can sometimes go by the name of candid photography, where a photo is taken without creating a posed appearance. But then that definition would sort of imply that you would have to be taking pictures of people. And some people disagree that that isn't always the case when it comes to street photography. The bottom line is street photography takes so many different forms, and it's that versatility that sort of makes it hard to describe or even define. But at the end of the day, we still know street photography when we see it. People will always have their different opinions, but don't let that discourage you from thinking you're doing street photography the wrong way. So in today's video, I want to go over 3 common misconceptions people who are new to the genre often have when it comes to doing street photography. These aren't going to be all bound to style, but the other things that involve street photography. If I make it out of this, if I make it out of the comment section alive in this video, I'll probably make this a series on the channel. So let's get right into it. When we think of street photography, we often first think of people. So it's really easy to think that you need to have people in your photos for it to be street photography. I don't personally believe that to be the case. I actually did a video on this whole topic of not photographing people earlier last year when the pandemic was just starting to ramp up. Man, that feels like years ago. It's crazy. But anyway, in the book Bystander, A History of Street Photography by Colin Westerbeck and Joel Meyerowitz, the topic of not having people in your photos and whether or not that could be street photography was brought up. Eugene Aget, one of the earliest pioneers of street photography, is mentioned in the book. Although you might not really think of it as street photography, because a lot of his work was focused on architecture and the empty streets of Paris in particular. And this is where the conversation of whether or not he was actually doing street photography or not. In the book, Westerbeck describes Aget as, like every practitioner of the genre, he wandered the streets with his camera looking for what today would be called photo opportunities. More importantly, he was ready to respond to errant details, chance juxtapositions, the quirkiness of life in the street. Some might see this work and, think of it as architecture photography. But Aget's images spoke so much more than just a presentation of architecture in Paris. It was a documentation of life in Paris through the eyes of someone who lived there at the time. Westerbeck further describes Aget's work as suggesting presence in the midst of absence. He was attempting to reveal life of the street as it adhered in the setting itself. It's almost like this visual scrapbook of, potential street photography moments. But it doesn't make his work any less street photography. Alright, so this is a hot topic and usually has a lot of disagreement when it comes to this, especially when you have people who don't shoot street photography and they get involved in these conversations. Before I go any further, do not use me or this video as your main source of legal advice when it comes to photographing people and needing model releases. I'm going to be talking about the United States, and so everything I say implies only to the United States, so please do your research for your own country and even your own state, even if you live in the United States. Some states have specific laws that differ from other states, so please do your research. With that said, in the United States, photographers have the legal right to photograph anyone they see in a public space. This is part of our First Amendment, to be able to express ourselves with freedom of speech. If this weren't the case, I probably wouldn't have this channel right here talking about it right now. A lot of our documentation throughout the years of our country's history wouldn't exist in textbooks like it does today. So, photographing what we see in the public is such a critical and important piece of our freedom as a country to document and show what has happened over the years. That's why this conversation has come up countless times in regards to police brutality and our rights as civilians to document and record law enforcement. In the US, we also have our expectation of privacy, which is a legal test that helps determine in which places and in which activities a person has the legal right to privacy. And one of the places where a person gives up their expectation of privacy is when they are in a public space, meaning that photographers, more specifically street photographers, have the legal right to photograph you when you're in public. But this also implies that anyone in a private space, if they can be seen by people on a public space, they also essentially give up their expectation of privacy. So say if I was in a business and there's this huge window and I'm next to the window and people on the sidewalk can see me, I'm giving up my expectation of privacy. Also want to quickly go over the difference between public and private spaces because I think the lines can get a little bit blurred sometimes. Public spaces can include parks, sidewalks, those are public most of the time, streets, and in some cities in the US, like New York City, the subway is also a public space. So as much as the MTA workers will tell you otherwise, you can take photos in the subway. Private properties can include museums, inside shopping malls, inside shopping businesses, government buildings, anything that's usually owned by a company or has a company name. When you're inside that building, it's more likely than not a private space. So that's the law side of things. Kind of boring, I know, but these are good things to know when you're getting into street photography. But then you have the whole conversation of just because something is legally okay doesn't necessarily mean it's right or the right thing to do. First of all, I believe there's a strong difference between doing street photography with a artistic intention than going out and taking photos of people on the street to cause discomfort and making people feel uncomfortable. If you're doing that, you're no longer doing street photography, in my opinion. You're being an asshole and you're intentionally making people feel uncomfortable. It's those people who don't respect the genre or people in general that give street photography such a bad rap sometimes. I consider myself an introvert and a pretty private person, so I am always sort of hypersensitive to other people's privacy. I think it's just important to know what you're personally comfortable with, and I'm not personally comfortable with getting into people's faces and photographing them. That's not really my kind of cup of tea, and just because that's what some people do doesn't mean you have to do that too. Usually if you start to feel uncomfortable yourself, that means the situation is making the person you're photographing uncomfortable too. So just be aware of the mannerisms of people. Over time you're gonna get better at reading these different signs, and you'll use past experiences to help make you make better decisions and stuff, and you'll learn what works for you, what pushes you to a new level to get better, all that stuff. Over time you'll find those things. If someone tells you that you're getting too close, you're breaking their bubble of privacy, the best thing you can do in that situation is to just respect their request and just live on to photograph another moment. One of the great things of this genre is that gear really doesn't make you take better street photos. You can take as powerful of a photo with the cheapest camera as you could with the most expensive camera. No other genre, in my opinion, emphasizes your ability to recognize a moment that's beautiful and capturing it than street photography. Having a much more expensive camera is not going to help you find that moment yourself. So it's really more about how you use the camera and how well you know it, so that when you see that moment, you know exactly how to take a photo, how to use the camera to take that photo. So I don't want to say that gear doesn't matter, because it does. Because if you are using a camera that you don't know how to use, that's gonna make you a worse street photographer because you're not going to know how to take a photo of the moment once you see it. So, you know, it's not the megapixels or, you know, the image quality that makes you a better street photographer. It's your knowledge of how to use that camera. So it's really important to find a camera that works for you, that you're comfortable with, and then you can go on to taking photos. Now, don't get me wrong, I love technology and the advancement of new cameras, how they're getting even better at, you know, image quality, megapixel sizes going up, just the functionalities are getting better and better. I love that stuff, and it's really interesting to me, so that's why you see me do, you know, gear related stuff here on the channel, and I know a lot of people are interested by that stuff too. But at the end of the day, we have to all come to the realization that the best camera for street photography is always going to be the camera you know how to use the best. For some, that's their beefy Canon 1DX, or their small compact X100V, or maybe it's their iPhone. One of my favorite follows on Instagram right now is Eric Van Nieten. He's a photographer based in New York City, and he primarily uses his iPhone. All these images right here, they were all taken with an iPhone 8. Yeah, the iPhone 8, the one that came out like 4 years ago. So that about wraps up this video. If you're new to street photography, first of all, welcome. And I hope you learned something along the way throughout this video. Or if you're not new to the genre, which I'm assuming is most of you guys, I hope I at least inspired you in some capacity through this video. I hope this makes you feel, you know, less restricted about what this genre is and what you're capable of doing, and not having these, you know, unwritten rules in the back of your head of what's right and what's wrong. So let me know if you want to see another one of these videos in the comments section below. Don't forget to hit the like button and the notification button next to my name below. All that stuff, it really helps out with the algorithm in letting other people see my videos for the first time. So if you do that, I love you. I'll see you all in the next video. Peace.